So the project today is using decoupage papers or fancy napkins to just give a fresher, updated look to a jam jar. So jam jars are really fashionable at the moment for weddings because, of course, I think since the recession of 2007 and 8, people are sort of going back to that more home-crafted, handcrafted, make do and mend way of doing things. So wherever you get your jam jars from, as I say, they could be peanut butter jars, they could be coffee jars, anything that you've got to hand really. And what I'm going to do in a moment, I will move the camera so you can see what I'm doing. But I have taken my 5-litre pot of glue and off camera, because I don't want to spill it everywhere, I've put a little bit of glue, PVA glue, into this pot, which is left over from our slime making empire. So I don't know if you've got young children at home, but there's a lot of sliming going on in our house. And I will just thin it down a little bit. So I've got some water in my jug, and I just give it a little bit of a thin down. Gosh, don't tell my husband I'm about to use one of our eating knives to mix this. He's at the back of the garden doing something, so don't tell on me. So I'm just mixing that through. And look, if I give it a quick wipe, you'll never know. If you didn't want to use your own personal cutlery, cocktail stick, lollipop stick, your finger, I guess, just to mix that up. But you could also use the proper glue. So this is what I put the link to in the discussion bit down below. And in fact, it's such a long time since I used that because I find the UPVA, we just got it all over the place. You can use proper glue, and I've also got this sealing varnish as well. So I think I went to some sort of trade fair a few years ago, and that was the beginning of me decoupaging everything in our house that sits still for long enough. So I will now adjust the camera and show you what I'm going to do. So I've got my glue, I've got my children's paintbrush, which I've got them because I had them for another project. They're really cheap, which is quite handy, but the bristles do fall out quite a lot. But again, you can get proper brushes. I'm going to use my proper decoupage papers, and then I think I'll come back and show you how to do the napkins. Exactly the same technique, but I'm just going to use my decoupage papers there. And I've got a pair of scissors as well. So let's go. So my decoupage papers, if you've not used them before, it's just like tissue paper. Although I'm guessing there's probably a slight sheen to it, and it's probably more robust than tissue paper. And if you want to, you can tear it. You don't need to have scissors, and depends how good your tearing skills are. You just can go down and tear them into small pieces. So that's about the size of a postage stamp, and of course nobody uses stamps anymore. I should probably, that's the size of a postage stamp, isn't it, if you do the self-service at the post office. So you could, if you felt so inclined, it just means if a bit of the paper is slightly different sized, or for speed, I would go through and cut the paper with a pair of scissors. I can go through all those layers together, so it's all folded up. I cut it in one, and then I can just sort of very much more of a production line going through. Now the thing that I will do, the top tip, oh, there's a slight breeze just then. That'll be my luck, won't it? They'll be blowing everywhere. I'm going to turn on my papers the right way up. So, taking brush, put it in the glue. You don't need lots of glue at all. And you just paint on a little bit. So what I've painted on, can you see if it's sort of there, isn't much bigger, I've got an itch, than the pieces of paper I've cut. Now instead of picking the bits of paper up individually, with your slightly glued brush, you should be able to pick them up like this, a bit like a doctor. And then you just apply it onto, I should paint underneath there a bit, onto your jar, and then paint back over the top of it. And so then we go to the next bit. So I've got enough brush glue on my brush that I don't need to add glue each time. So I've got a damp patch on my table there. Oh, that's the front doorbell. and then layer it up. So it's like building a brick wall. You don't want any gaps. And I'm going to go along quite methodically. If you're a more spontaneous person, you might want to be splatting them all over the place. So I've chosen a floral paper here, but you choose whatever you fancy. And carry on like this. So a bit more glue. So you don't want to get too gluey because your paper will slide all over the place. But obviously you need enough that's going to stick. And I can see that my brush already is shedding bristles. I mean, if you had just a children's paintbrush, a skinnier brush would work well. I did think about using an old pastry brush. So again, picking it up with my gluey paintbrush rather than trying to pick the pieces up individually and then flattening it all down. And I'm just doing a tiny bit of the glue on the underneath because it's going to, the bits of paper are just slightly underneath, just so I don't end up with a sort of a naked line at the bottom of the vase. Oops, they're flying away. So, butting those up together and carrying on. I do kind of think perhaps I should have made one earlier because it is quite slow progress, and if you actually were to watch me make this from beginning to end, we might sit here for about an hour. But I will do several circuits and then you'll be able to get the idea. Oops, that bit. Not playing ball. That's turned over, that piece. Oops. So it is a bit sticky. But the idea is you shouldn't be touching it with your fingers because you just get glued up. I mean, it's no hard and fast rule. But if you can perfect this picking up with your paintbrush, you won't get quite so sticky. So there I have almost done, I forgot to glue there, one complete circuit. Like that. So you could just leave it like that, and in fact I could have done just a band around the middle. So it's a matter, again, where you're going is what you want to do. If you decide actually this is the worst project ever, perhaps you might want to skip it. But you might think, oh, I want to cover the whole jar, or I just want to do a little bit of the jar. My idea was I would just come part way up. You've seen those pictures on Pinterest, but it looks like they put the jam jar into a dish of paint. It sort of has a lovely scalloped line around it. So I wanted to do for something that probably covers the stems of the flowers, but doesn't hide the everything. So I was just going to come part way up. And what I tend to do is just cut papers in sections, because you never quite know whether you like the look of the paper or how much you're going to need. So I wouldn't over chop everything. You kind of want to cut it in strips and then adapt as you go along. So I'll need to, oops, a bit more glue, and there's that shedding paintbrush again. So I'm cutting more papers. So that was on the fold there, and then just slice, slice, slice. I've gone a bit bigger this time. That'll speed things up a little bit. So glue, dollop, put on, glue, dollop, and stick. So I'm gluing where I'm going to put the paper, and then sort of gluing over the top to hold it in place. And I've got a gap there, so I need to make sure I cover it up. And as I want to, oops. So I've got a really good band going on there. So for demonstration purposes at the moment, I think I'm going to leave it like that. Otherwise it will literally be like paint drying. But I do want to show you something I've done before. Come up again. You won't quite see me, perhaps you will. And that's this over here. So actually this is the same paper. So I've done a complete jar. And what I did, don't really notice the decoupage paper, had blue flowers on it. When I did the main coat, I didn't put any blue flowers on the front, and I saved my blue flowers and I cut them up and added them on afterwards. So you don't need to use the paper as it is on the printed sheet. You can be a bit more decorative with it, and I think that works really well. And the advantage of this bottle, I have it on the sides, it just looks pretty on its own, and I use it actually for putting, it's been like this for years, a stick and then a dried hydrangea head. And actually this head, you can see I've had it for ages, it's got dust all over it. A good way of getting dust off your dried flowers is to put the hairdryer on them and it all blows away. And actually that is quite an old piece of hydrangea, but I've zhuzhed it up with some spray paint. If you just look underneath, it's sort of gone brown. But I did 2 or 3 colours of a pink and a white, and just a really light touch, which just perks it up a little bit. So, and it works really well with the decoupage. The word of warning is that this is only glued on, so when you're having water in your vase for flowers, you just need to be really careful that you're not going to be washing off the decoupage papers at the same time. So it is a sort of go with care thing. It will be really great for dried flowers, but just take care if you are using fresh flowers and fresh water. So if you wanted to use the napkin, exactly the same technique. So that's a jar I have stripped off ages ago, and in fact it has got a bit of gunk on there still, so again I could get the white spirit out, or as you're going to cover the jar anyway, but it probably doesn't matter if there's a bit of a ridge work underneath. So just shine that up with your white spirit or your nail varnish remover, and then the same thing. So let's come down again, and with my napkins here, so it's quite with the geometric pattern, it's quite trendy at the moment, so I might save the pattern later and do what I did with the vase and put in the decorative pieces on top. So I'm going to use these zigzags, which are making my eyes go ever so slightly woozy, and the same thing. So if you were a really precise person, you might want to measure out so you get each of your pieces of paper with the same size, but I just eye it up. So yeah, that's gone through on the fold. I'll slide my scissors up just to cut through the fold, and then cut them in the same way as before. And then do exactly the same technique. So again, I won't do very many of these because you've got the idea now. Oops, I need to separate. Oh, bits of napkin are staying together. Let's separate them out a little bit, and then lift them up. That still was 2 pieces. The same thing. So where it's got the chevron pattern, I'm going to mix that up a bit and having going all different directions. And I quite like this idea of only coming up 3/4 of the way up the vase. But you do what you want, whether you want total coverage or you want to be a bit more decorative or a bit more innovative with what you're doing. Oops. I think what the problem is my napkin is 2-ply, so it's got 2 pieces of paper together, and I just want the top coat. So I do need separating out. You can see that's sort of the underside of the napkin. I think I just want the top one, otherwise they're going to slide around. And you do the same thing like that and continue on. Now the other idea would be to perhaps even decorate a plant pot. If I bring you round again. So I've actually used fabric from decoupage before, and in fact I thought I had a teapot still, but I can't find it. So that would be a really lovely idea if you had plant pots, you had herbs growing in. Imagine you just put your little pot inside. So you could either cover that with papers or to cover it with fabric as well, exactly the same way of doing it, with cutting up in small squares, put your glue on, fabric on, then glue it down. And then if you wanted to, right at the end, with both the techniques, is to go once and for all with another layer of PVA glue, or even the special varnish as well, that just to give it a sort of more protective finish. But it is just glue and water or glue and fabric, so it's not going to be really, really hard wearing. So you just need to take care that you're not, washing these up in the dishwasher. They'll take a little bit of spillage of water, but not lots. So what I will do is I'm going to, off camera, I'm going to finish my little jar, and then I'm going to show you just a really, really simple way of putting flowers into your jar, which you could use for any small container really. I've finished my jam jar, although when I show it around, I've decided to go sort of with a sort of sloped, scalloped look, just because it would be too easy to have a base around the bottom or to cover the whole lot, just to encourage you perhaps to think about doing things a little bit differently, so you could see through the vase, the jam jar, and see right to the back, or you could turn it round so it does look like it is solid. And I've just used my papers randomly, and I haven't put the decorative bits and pieces in like I have on the big jar there. And then with my hexagonal pot, I used my napkin, my geometric napkin, and then just to make it a little bit different as well, I've put one of the blue diamonds into every other side, and then with smaller pieces of the napkin just separated them out again, just to give you a few more ideas. You don't need to do it solidly. You could become more artistic about the way you apply your tissue paper, but you will need to make sure it dries before you do add your flowers in. And I will say it's much easier working with the decoupage papers, because the napkins, although as you can see it's worked really well, and when it dries out it'll look even better, that the papers of the napkin, it's not just one sheet of paper, sometimes it's two that you can separate apart. What I found actually with mine, it was 3 pieces of paper, so I was dabbing it on and then leaving one of the sort of backing papers behind, so it can be slightly harder work, but even so you can get a really good finish with the napkins. And then here I'm just finishing off with my little plant pot I showed you, so I thought with this I'll just put a rim on it. So exactly, there's one last piece to do in the edge there, so glue that down, pick up my piece of decoupage paper, and then I need to line it up to cover the gap, and then you can see the piece of paper is standing upright. And this is the same when you've got any curves to work your way around, you need to just very carefully, and again not too much glue on your brush, and bring it over. Now when it comes to putting your flowers in your vases, I'm going to use an elastic band to keep everything together. So I've picked some bits and bobs. Oh, I've just discovered, look, I'm just about to pick them up. And I picked some choisia, and I've never actually put it into the vase to soak up water. So top tips there is, number 1, don't pick your flowers and greenery from the garden, if you're using them from the garden, in the height of the day and the heat and the sunshine, because they'll be under pressure, and you're much better picking anything from your garden, I would say first thing in the morning or last thing at night, so when the temperatures have cooled down again. And the idea here was that I was going to pick my bits and pieces, recut the stems, and I had put them in this little jug just to take up water while I was working on my project, and I've just discovered that little leaf wasn't taking up water. So I'm a bit restricted about what I can pick from my garden. We don't have lots of flowers in our garden, and looking around this afternoon, a lot of the greenery we have just looked like it was absolutely limp and fading. So what I have managed to find is some sedum, and this will come out in flower later in the season. It's got quite rubbery leaves, so obviously something really tall, possibly too tall for my jam jar. And then I have some fennel, so this is scented fennel, really lovely, and in fact, if you like a cup of herbal tea, you can put that the fronds straight into boiling water, and it's got a really delicious scent. And then scent-wise as well, I've got some rosemary. And in terms of sort of different textures, it's always nice to include different shapes and textures into your flower arrangements. So I have gone for one of everything. This little shrub is called Magic Carpet, with quite greeny yellow leaves, quite pointed. And then very carefully picking it up, we've got a rambling rose, which has got the hips on. And also it's got some thorns, tiny though they are, they're very prickly. And then the echinops thistle, and it's a beautiful flower as well. In fact, you can pick this at just this stage and use it as a dried flower, or dry it out to use it as a flower later in the year. If you are going to dry your flowers, you need to pick them before the actual flowers develop. So it's the dried bud head really than anything else. I can hear raindrops, hooray! So what I need to do is, when I'm making this little arrangement, you can see just for effect there that I wouldn't put anything, oh, my fingers are sticking a little bit, too tall into your jam jars, because they will topple over. Remember, they're only very short, low vessels, and you don't want to topple over. So I'm going to cut everything quite short, so it just pops ahead of my jam jar, and I'm going to make a little arrangement in my hand. You'll find that if you try and arrange flowers how you might in a vase by pushing them all in individually, that they will fall out and you get yourself in a bit of a pickle. So what I'm going to do, these have had a lovely drink while I was working. I'm actually now going to take off the leaves, because when you put your flowers in water, you want the clean stem to be in water. You don't want any leaves in the water. That is what it will make your, they'll rot off in the water, and then the bacteria that accumulates will make your flowers die faster. So here, gently peeling off the leaves. Didn't show you that actually. I found a bud of Japanese anemone hiding under some shrubbery. And then with the echinops, the blue thistle, pull those off as well. So you might find that the thistle irritates you, so just be really careful about what you are picking in your garden, that it's, you know, you're not going to hurt yourself through the prickles or thorns, or it's not something that, you know, sometimes you can react badly to the flowers. And then with the rose, I can pick off the leaves, which are going to go inside the vase, and I'm going to just slice away the thistles. Because although I like the hips on this rose, I definitely, when I'm trying to arrange a little bunch in my hand, don't want to get prickled. And then there's the fennel. So what I could do here is the head that I'm interested in. What I could do, if I cut it down there, gives me two pieces. So I've got a little bit of frond and a little bit of head there, but I will have to discard this side piece here. So don't always just think it's only the heads that are interesting. You might have an extra bit of greenery to go with your flower as well. And then with my rosemary, so it is very aromatic, I've got 4 stems there, so I'm going to break them all apart. And the same thing, I don't want any leaves or side shoots in the water. So I pull those down, just making sure you're holding firmly here and your hand isn't going up the stem, you are going down the stem. In fact, when I went out to Canterbury on Saturday night, we went to see Shrek down at the Marlow, and I had a gin and tonic, or a gin-based cocktail beforehand, and they'd put a piece of rosemary into my drink. It's like a swizzle stick, so you could always do that. Just give your drinks a little summer fizz. So this is the trick, is instead of arranging your flowers into your vase like that, just one at a time, and it can be quite tricky to do, I'm going to arrange them in my hand. So I'm not making it a proper hand tied, and I'm just going to hold the flowers in my hand and group them together. And you want to have a few flowers. If you don't have many flowers, you'll just have, you know, you could just have something artfully off to one side. But they do tend to slop around a little bit if you don't have much in your vase, which is why I like grouping them together. So you only need a few stems. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think. And then my bits of rosemary, which would also make a good, as I say, accompaniment to a summer drink. Or your fennel as a refreshing cup of tea. So I've just grouped those together so the head looks quite nice, and of course these stems are way too long, so just for manageability purposes I'm going to cut off the head of my sedum and then wrap my elastic band around. Now the easiest way to wrap an elastic band around your flowers is to, instead of putting it as you might do conventionally, and as I put it on and stretching and twisting, I'm going to slide it up one of the stems. So I'm sliding it up the stem of my flowers, so it's only attached to the rosemary, and then with the elastic band I go all the way around and then hook it back over another stem in the bunch. And if you buy your flowers from the supermarket, you'll see that on the whole that's the way they've been attached. So it's none of this sliding it on, twisting it and back, because sometimes the elastic band doesn't have enough stretch to go over the edge of your flowers. You can see there that I started there and finished it there, so it holds it really tight together. Oh look, I forgot that one. I wonder if I can slide it down. Yes I can. So I can just slide that in, push it in from the top, work out where the stem is and just wiggle it down a bit. So it's just a nice contrast. You've got pink and yellow always look really good together, but it's the spikiness of the echinopsis and the sort of frothiness of the sedum, and then the spikiness, the soft spikiness of the rosemary as well, just makes it look really, an interesting bunch. Or you could just put all the same flower in as well. I'm just moving things around so my rose hips weren't hidden. And then put it in your vase, and you can see here it's still sitting a little bit upright, a bit too proud. So what I would do is measure up. I just want the head sort of floating across the top, so I can hold that up to my vase, and I know then that I need to cut the stems down a little bit shorter, about that length there, and I can do that all in one go. And then ideally all the stems should be cut at a slight angle, but you have to decide whether you want to go through and cut all those back diagonally. And then with my water, I say being careful not to drip it down the sides of your vase, because it is only sort of a wallpaper paste mix almost, just the water and the paper, and then you can slide your flowers in like that. They're just nestled down really low, so you get a completely different look for your flowers. So you could just have your flowers in a naked jam jar, or you could go a little bit more decorative. So if I wanted to put those into this jar here, again I would need to cut them down slightly lower. So my preference is, for this arrangement, is to have something quite low. And as I've used, if you're shopping for flowers, I've used a lot of red on my tissue paper. I would perhaps pick some reddish flowers. So at this time of the year, you could be using, well, there's all year round varieties like carnations, spray carnations and red roses. You might get some lovely freesia, reddish tones, or you could, if you were going with my black and white theme, well, white would look really good. In fact, those with the sort of soft muted greens, I'm thinking perhaps it looks better in that jam jar rather than my red. So I might pour some water into this jar. As I say, cut the flowers down even shorter. And if you had a really plentiful garden, I'm holding them up, I want the heads just nestling on the top. So I've got another centimetre to cut off here. If you had a garden full of flowers or an allotment, you could be really going overboard with your choices and really making a really full display. So here we're just starting off really easily and just having a really simple, almost naive looking arrangement. And if you felt that the elastic band was just constricting things in too much, well, what you'd do is you'd cut it off once you were pleased with what you had in your hand, and just let the flowers relax a little bit more, and they will just rest down into the vase, and they fill up the neck a bit better. But I would say, first of all, I would try doing them with the elastic band trick. It just holds everything together. My hands are sticking to this jam jar because the glue isn't quite dry. But you can hold them in your hand first of all, elastic band them together, and that means you can get the sizing right and then put them in the jar. If you like it with the elastic band, that's really good, and if you think they look too constrained, you can just snip the elastic band away, and there you have the finished arrangement. I'd love to see pictures of what you're doing, so you know, if you've got pictures of your papers before you start, what you're thinking of using, what shape jam jar you're going for, is it a jam jar, coffee jar, and of course what flowers you're going to use. So I think I prefer that personally, with them set loose a little bit, my flowers there, but the elastic band trick is really good for when you're measuring up with your flowers. And I'm going to have to put this down carefully because my hand is now glued to my jar.